Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr. Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast.
Welcome to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast. Our Love's a Secret Weapon community is going to celebrate my collaborator, Dr. Adam Gerace. His birthday is this time, and we are in a great union to listen to a beautiful writing that he has composed and will share with us. Happy birthday, Adam.
So this is 40. Last year, I turned 40. I write that with some trepidation even after several months. Strangely, though I've never really tried to hide my age in my writing, my references to Police Academy movies and the Australian TV series A Country Practice kind of give it away. I do feel a little vulnerable putting it out there. Turning 40 sounds like, and I guess it was, a big deal. Unlike my 30th, where I had a rather extravagant party, I decided to keep it low-key and host some smaller events with various friends. Bob surprised me with a weekend away in the Adelaide Hills on an organic farm in what's called a tiny house. We arrived late when the sun had gone down, and after fumbling around for the light switches in the pitch black, the house revealed itself to be charming, not so tiny, and well-equipped. Bob heated dinner, I opened the Chardonnay, and we settled in to watch the Eurovision semi-finals. We did pretty much the same thing on our first trip away over 10 years ago. The next day, we had a leisurely start before meeting friends who had driven up to meet us for lunch at a winery. An evening of cheese and more wine on the deck followed. Best of all, the paddocks surrounding the house had cows. Such fun. Going away made my birthday feel a little gentler. It's strange that when I was a teenager, I couldn't wait to be older. I loved the idea of having what I saw as stylish early 2000s adult clothes, renting an apartment with beautiful floorboards and an impressive view, and hosting dinner parties where the conversations would be important, stimulating, and most important, sparkling. I wanted to be old enough to say things like, we've known each other for 3 decades, or I did that 20 years ago, when referring to friends, colleagues, and experiences. I never really felt like a teenager at the time, although in some ways, compared to my friends, I had the most growing up to do. Have you watched the animated TV series BoJack Horseman about an anthropomorphic actor horse? There's a character, Vincent Adultman, who is catfishing BoJack's Hollywood agent, Persian cat Princess Caroline. In reality, though, Vincent is 3 children hiding under a trench coat, standing on each other's shoulders. Substitute a trench coat with suede jacket and corduroy pants, and you kind of have me in my late teens trying to play all grown up. In the weeks leading up to my birthday then, I surprised myself by how anxious I was to be turning 40. Turning 40 really brought into sharp focus that there isn't infinite time. I know that's not a particularly groundbreaking reflection, but when you're younger, it seems like you have nothing but time. Remember those summers off school when the clock moved ever so slowly? Here in Australia, in the summer heat, we'd lie on the couch or the cool tiled floor, watching the cricket and reruns of TV shows that were on hiatus. Later at university, it didn't feel indulgent to pass weeks with doing very little of anything other than partying and sometimes drinking the night away. There would be enough time to figure out what you wanted to do with your life. There was oh so much time to explore options and people, even if for me that meant bouncing from bad relationship to bad relationship until, not a moment too soon, I experienced some insight into my patterns. Up until I was in my 30s, it felt as if life could be a series of vignettes rather than putting something together that in the cold light of day would look and feel rounded and whole. The year I turned 30, I wrote an email to my mentor and friend, Professor Rosalind Cartwright, about how it seemed time was drifting. Her response was very impactful. She wrote me back advising, and I quote, "Spend your young adulthood wisely so that in the following decades you will have something valuable to do that lasts." She ended with, "I saw promise in you that needs to be a focus so that time does not continue to slip away." Professor Cartwright's advice spurred me to action and I got busy. I started meeting certain goals that are deemed appropriate in the area in which I was working, such as publishing a certain number of papers and winning grants. However, I don't know if I got her advice then. I felt a dissonance between what I was supposedly accomplishing and what I really felt. I saw little meaning in what I was doing, was dissatisfied, and believed that after so much supposed promise, I was treading water. At the time, I unconsciously kept pursuing my goals, but didn't understand why I was frustrated or felt trapped. It was several years before I truly started to understand, in part thanks to a good therapist, that fulfillment, be it in work, home life, or in relationship with oneself or others, comes from living life in line with one's values. Goals should be underpinned by values rather than goals being seen as a proxy for knowing one's values or as an end in themselves. Something valuable, as Professor Cartwright put it, is something that allows you to live authentically, from which you derive satisfaction, and that helps you to get out of bed in the morning. Something valuable, as I've come to define it, is also something that is important, but not a disproportionate part of one's overall life satisfaction. I do need to say that I am now somewhere where I enjoy working and find the work fulfilling. But I have to admit that I feel those late 20s, early 30s years could have been spent better. Turning 40, I couldn't stave off the feeling that there were some wasted and lost years in the wilderness that I could never get back. My therapist once told me that they thought I derived a lot of my identity from work rather than it being a proportionate part of who I thought I was. Eckhart Tolle wrote in his book A New Earth about how rather than seeing a job or even being a parent as something we do or a function we fulfill, we can confuse these roles with our identity. Unease comes from when the role ends, changes, or in my case, isn't fulfilling. We can start to question, who am I? Or who am I now? I am consciously working on not identifying so much with my work role and feel I've made a bit of a breakthrough. If I reflect on it, my disquiet had a lot to do with realizing time is finite and over-identifying with an unfulfilling work identity. But there was another role or identity that I was struggling to let go of as I turned 40. When I started working, so much of my identity and attitude towards myself came from how I thought others saw me. This is what Charles Cooley referred to in 1902 as the looking glass self. I started my PhD at 21 and I was the youngest in the department by quite a few years. Submitting my thesis 5 years later and then starting a job as a postdoctoral researcher, I was still by a long shot the youngest person in the room. Sometimes I resented that because even though I worked hard over those years, I didn't feel I was listened to or that others thought I had enough gravitas. I'd be lying though if I said there weren't times when I did relish it. Colleagues were surprised or impressed with what I had done or the work I'd produced at, as they put it, your age. That felt good. While I haven't been the youngest person in the room for a while, turning 40 did represent a more objective changing of the guard.
Crazy as life goes, we'll write a story we tell to a very own. So let's live, lost in the moment, taking it all in as we go. You know I'm counting on you.
Over the past few months, I've started to look at turning 40 a bit differently. I'm reluctant to present to you a things I know now that I'm 40 list. It seems a little indulgent and perhaps a little bit presumptuous. When reflecting on her legacy and waxing a bit nostalgic, Bette Midler caught herself once and said something along the lines of, well, I've thought of my legacy since I was 21. I feel the same, but that's Bette Midler. Nonetheless, I will share with you some thoughts I've had over the last few months. If nothing else, it might be an improvement on my things I know now that I'm 20, which, if I had written, is most probably on a 3.5-inch floppy disk and due to outdated technology, mercifully lost to time. So, what's it all about? First, there is an infinite time. That's a good thing. Perhaps that means we need to make sure that we do as much as we can today, rather than think we'll do it tomorrow. It's not about quantity, but about us understanding and doing what is meaningful to oneself. To me, to take psychologist Dr. Russ Harris's terms, it is about contribution, creativity, and connection. I truly do believe that if we're striving to live life in line with our values, that's not lost time. I didn't know at the time I was striving, but during a lot of those unfulfilling years, I knew it didn't feel right and did what I could to figure out what I wanted. People often tell me how busy I am, how much, as one friend puts it, I never stop home. Maybe that's true, but if I can be as honest with you as I can, I feel that for so many experiences, I've not really been in the moment because of anxiety or other issues that have at times been a significant part of my life. They tell you to live, laugh, and love. I'm more of a ruminate, rinse, and repeat kind of guy. There's a definite feeling of not being present, but being on the outside looking in. I was very busy in my 20s and a good part of my 30s, and from the outside, that might have looked fulfilling. But even if others weren't, I was aware that I could have been doing more. That's not perfectionism talking, so much as a reflection on how many days have been spent on the couch, exhausted from thoughts. So much dissatisfaction from work came from it not being a good environment, but other dissatisfaction was much more complex. Regardless, I can choose to see all this as lost time, or I can see it as being a painful but necessary part of becoming more aware of what I want and value.
I got to have friends. That's right, friends. I gotta be mine. I gotta be mine. I gotta be mine. Look around and see all of my friends. Oh, friends. That's right, friends.
You know, I don't think our underlying or core values necessarily change as we get older, but their relative importance and how they are expressed might. Connection with others has always been so important to me. One thing that has changed over the last few years is the realization that while I want to accomplish and contribute something to the wider world, for me, true cherished memories are experiences shared with friends and family. Mindfulness during those times is challenging, but worth it. What has given me that sense of meaning of late? Well, it's dinner parties, lazy days on the beach spent with friends, cultivating a hydrangea, or baking a cake. Watching Police Academy all these years later with Bob and insightfully telling him, Captain Harris really isn't a villain. He just demands excellence of his recruits. That's an insight I couldn't have had in 1989. But guess what? I can now say about a friend, I've known them for 3 decades. Fortunately, I can also say, so good to make a new friend. On the topic of friends, I think respect for others requires self-respect. I'm trying to be more respectful of people and myself. I don't want to make excuses, but at times when my head has not been in its best place, I haven't always been so respectful of people's time. I would cancel close to an event. Beyond feeling depleted, this action also comes from a lack of self-esteem. The voice in my head was telling me, I'm not feeling well. Why would they want to hang out with me anyway? My company's not that important. So what if I cancel? For that, I'm sorry. I still think time can drift, in a way. In my early 20s, I fell out with a couple of people who were at that time important to me, and I let time drift because it seemed there'd be time. Then you look back and realize that was 20 years ago. As I approached 40, I reached out to a couple of them to say, I'm sorry. It wasn't about wanting to diminish my responsibility or an exercise in reciprocity, wanting them to acknowledge in turn the role they had played. I didn't even expect a response. I did this because I truly felt sorry and wanted to unequivocally tell them that. I wasn't the best person I could have been at that time. Understanding what makes us tick. I think the best work I've done on myself is to try to figure out who I am. Besides being and perhaps looking young, I think that a lot of those times that I wasn't listened to in a meeting was because I didn't know what I stood for or what I wanted. As my friend Donna has said on this podcast, others often don't trust us when we don't trust ourselves. I think I also deferred to others because I am a people pleaser. The people pleasing ran so deep, in fact, that I wasn't just hiding what I thought, afraid to tell people. Often it wasn't even knowing what I thought. Maybe they would have paid attention if I had had the courage of my convictions. Of course, it's also possible that wouldn't have made a difference because some of them struck me as the kind of people who don't listen to, say, women, people from a background that isn't theirs, or the gay kid who wasn't trying to run everyone down to derive his own identity. If that's the case, more's the pity. Listening and empathy can go a long way.
The ability to empathise is actually a skill that you can learn, though for some of us it's more difficult than for others. Dr Adam Gerace is a Senior Research Fellow and been studying empathy for the past 10 years. Now, Adam, in common usage, empathy, I think, is it's really being able to put yourself in the shoes of another person. Is that how you define it?
Absolutely. I think, and there's so much complexity around the term empathy, but generally I use it to refer to sort of two areas. And the first, as you said, Amanda, is that ability to put ourselves into someone else's perspective, attempt to imagine what they're thinking and feeling. And that's rather a cognitive or sort of internal process. And hopefully what that does is it helps us to better understand what the other person is experiencing. And sometimes it can also lead to experiencing some emotion, which is kind of the second component when we speak about empathy. And so we think about emotional empathy as experiencing an emotion as a result of someone else's experience. Our reaction might be to feel something very similar to what they're feeling. So if your friend on the phone is sad, you might feel sad. If you might also experience a reaction. So they may be sad, but you don't feel sad. You might feel compassionate for them.
Empathy. Empathy is what I research, and I love it. It's messy, sometimes biased, but fundamental to who we are. Sometimes it's the closest we can come to really knowing someone else. There's another concept, though, from psychology that I've always liked. It's called openness to experience. I feel so much more open to others' experiences. From a young age, I was so focused on getting good grades and being academic that I didn't realize the diversity of others' experiences and perspectives and how they could so enrich my own life. I'm so fascinated now by people telling me about their early years, their work, their hobbies, their travels. I'm endlessly in awe of the baker who knocks my socks off with a delicious cake, the gardeners who have helped me replenish my backyard, friends who are creative. Learning should be an end and not a byproduct of striving for a good grade. Frankly, so much of academia is about convincing everyone else how great you are. I never really bought into that, but now I just want to listen to others and soak it all in. I've often written about the relationship between empathy for others and our own self-understanding. It's something I'd love to research in more depth, but have had difficulty finding collaborators. And what stopped me is taking to heart their thinking that it's too hard to investigate. So I'm planning to do it on my own. Regardless, turning 40 put into focus an experience I had a few years ago. I had written something about a psychological concept called the spotlight effect, where adolescents become self-conscious and believe that everyone is watching them. I wrote about my own experiences with the effect when I was younger. The idea for this piece was that in the age of social media, who's to say this next wave of teenagers are incorrect? But what the piece became was an admonishing of younger people who focus more on cultivating an image than achieving something. I was quite pleased with what I had written, thought it was funny, and even included references to people from the era in which I grew up. These were people I aspired to be like in charm, looks, or popularity. People like Dita Brummer from the Australian series Home and Away. Quite pleased with myself, I showed my writing to a friend who has read a lot of my work and asked for their feedback. A bit uncharacteristically, he was less than enthused, telling me gently but directly, "I'm not quite sure what the purpose of this is." I kept working on the piece for some time before finally abandoning it. I believe the reason the piece didn't work was not because I was saying anything that wasn't untrue about social media and some young people. It didn't work because I was a man in his late 30s with an inner child that was raging at those younger than him, who seemed to have so much attention thrown at them without even having to do anything. It took me back to my teenage years. As an adolescent, adulation from others never felt easy. People were not always kind. Compassion from others then was much needed. But now I wasn't being compassionate to those grappling for identity and taking a bite of a very tempting apple in the way of socially mediated love. In wanting to be more caring towards young people, I need to be more nurturing to my young, suede-jacketed, corduroyed self. And to remind myself, all is not always what it seems. The people I adored when I was younger, like Dita Brummer, had private experiences and feelings that I could never know. All is not what it seems from what it appears to be on the outside. I've realized that life doesn't go the way you imagined it at 21. Career goals can go unfulfilled, priorities change, Supposedly random events can change life in an instant. You lose people whose loss you feel so acutely sometimes you can't breathe. This leaves you appreciating life even with an awareness of its fragility, but you are never quite the same. Longing for what cannot be is very real and very painful. There are days when you give in to that pain, and there are days when it's with you, but you're okay. What will our legacies be? That's not for us to decide. All we can do is keep striving to accomplish what we want and what's important to us. Time will take care of the rest. Life indeed is different to what we imagine, and it can be splendid. I never did get that apartment in my 20s, but I have a house now with lovely floorboards and a view of a park across the road where I've made memories with my new community of neighbours who have become very good friends. I do host dinner parties, and I love how things I've collected over the years that are old, because I adore mid-century, get to be vibrant again and to be a part of new memories. How wonderful too that I can buy new things for my dinner parties that will have the mark of our history on them just by us enjoying them. So go forth, everyone, and proclaim on my behalf, Bob, Adam needs more vases. I also have a Bob and a Lucy. How lucky am I? Life does and doesn't look how I imagined it all those years ago. And I think that's great.
Well, first, my love, I shall wish you a very, very happy birthday from myself, from my loved one, Jared, and from our community of Love's a Secret Weapon. I think that it was very brave of you to write your feelings and to be cognizant of your feelings and express them so beautifully. So thank you for reading your heartfelt feelings and memories that I'm sure many, many people can relate to in their own way, maybe not with the exact examples, but the references that you give are very relatable. So, oh my goodness.
It was no, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and you're right, it's my birthday and I'm a year older than I was at 40, so it took me some time to, as it sometimes does, to process some of those thoughts and what I've been thinking of. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to read that to our listeners, because I think, like you said, Donna, that it is, and I think I've learnt this from you, it can be very vulnerable sometimes to put feelings out there and to be truthful and put that out in the world. But that's what I learned from you, that on this podcast over 65 plus episodes, you've been honest and you've sought in your readings and in discussion to understand yourself, but also, I guess, to understand yourself in the service of other people as well. That all our experiences, all the details change, but I think all our experiences can have similar components. And so sometimes hearing what someone else has experienced or what they've made of it can add clarity to our own lives.
It's interesting, sweetheart, that sometimes even the words don't. It's the feeling behind the words that connect with other people's hearts, and the recognition you give yourself that all of your life's experiences weren't as perfect as you wish they could be. Welcome to the club.
It's so true, isn't it? And
We are constantly learning, and with the energies that are supporting us, we are dropping from our intellect more into our hearts, and that's where we connect. When you opened your heart to yourself to write this story and then to read it and share it with all of us. That shows the growth.
Well, that's exactly it, isn't it? That if you think that everything, you're gonna one day wake up and go, everything's in place, I think that's usually where the roof is going to fall off your house, because that isn't the case. But I think you're right, that idea of I think so much of my life and what I do for work or the way I've approached stuff has and not that it hasn't been about feeling, but a lot of that is quite intellectual. It's all about the cognitive, and I think sometimes what can happen when you do that so much, and as I said, and I think a lot of people perhaps who are listening can relate to this idea that you go through school and for whatever reason, whether it's the type of person you are or whether it's perhaps family and what they value, but you often focus very much on achieving a grade, getting the best mark, things like that, and you don't take in the learning processes and just being involved in ideas and feelings and really thinking. It's all about that end point. And I think in some ways I took that into early adulthood, where I thought what you need to do is pursue goals. There's goals that are set for you, whether it's at work or whatever you've come up with, and that's what you need to keep doing. And as long as you're ticking them off, great, you're doing well. And I think probably what I didn't realize for a long time is that goals are only one part of the picture, and it's really about understanding what you value, because values are what is going to keep you moving throughout your life. That's an ongoing thing. Russ Harris, who's a psychologist that I referred to, gives the example that, say, getting married is a goal. Once you get married, you've ticked off that goal. It's done. But being, say, a listening and caring and sharing partner is something that's a value. That's something that you value, but that's something ongoing. You don't get to a point one day where you've achieved that. That's always something that you are doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think being aware of what you value can help you pursue your goals, but also gives meaning to your life.
Yes, yes, yes. And Joseph Campbell, with just, not quoting him, but he has a way of saying that, when life gives you that feeling of wonder, that wonder, so that when you wake up in the morning and, you actually are grateful to wake up. And all of the, mental process of this is what I have to do, and, all of that. But trying to stay in your heart is a very interesting discipline, and the mental things that one needs to do. But with the consciousness that you're in kind of a flow, and that when you think about time, that you don't always have to look at a clock. I mean, sure, if you have to catch a plane, I understand. It's not going to wait for you. But generally, I find, well, when I look at my wrist to see what time it is, I see 2 hairs past a freckle. and Jared tells me all the time, he's always very punctual and, reminds me of what time it is. Well, he's kind of starting to get used to the idea that I'm always on time, not because the clock says it's time, but because I am where I'm supposed to be exactly when that is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, with the numbers that are indicated. It's taken, well, I've been that way my whole life. But then fitting yourself in to the regimen of what life has been like, and having to fit in, as you were expressing, time or your accomplishments or who you are, and always wanting to, to please others, and all of the points that you made come under the topic of acceptance. And I think what you're becoming, or what you're evolving into, your awareness, is that you are accepting who you are for exactly who you are. And that is absolutely the greatest gift that you could give yourself, So another happy birthday.
Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think acceptance. I've been reading a lot about acceptance lately because, of course, there's acceptance to self, but there's also sometimes acceptance of what's in your life or of other people's actions or things like that. And I think for a long time, I kind of thought acceptance had to mean that you were okay with something. And that's not the case. That sometimes, say, there might be a particularly difficult relationship in your life, and you think acceptance means I have to be all right with this, or that's I'm condoning this, and that's not perhaps the case. It's about accepting the reality of what is and being in a mindful state of awareness. And when you're in a mindful state of awareness, you're aware of what you're experiencing and what you're going through and what a particular situation is doing to you. But that you can also put some distance between what you're experiencing and your reaction to it and realize that they're not one and the same. Something happens to you and you react a certain way and you think that's kind of just inevitable because that's the way I feel. But realizing and questioning, why am I feeling like that? And seeing that experience as an experience and not, I guess, fusing that with your emotion, but being able to step back and to look at that as it is and realize as it's unfolding. And of course, that's a very big topic, and I'm probably not explaining it the most eloquently at this time of morning here in Adelaide. But yeah, that idea that I think acceptance is accepting reality. It doesn't have to mean you like it, but it's that acceptance, that's that openness to what the experience is, and being able to look at it.
Yeah. There's also the point that you know who you are through the experience, that you're like, wait a minute, why am I here? Why is this happening to me? What is the usefulness of my experience? What is it for my soul, for my own personal growth? Who's going to benefit from this very uncomfortable situation? And I think that, we all come in to learn. And so being hard on yourself, I think that's the hard, that's, the uphill climb.
Be your best friend. Be your best friend. Choose wisely. Be sensible. Be your best friend. Be your best friend. Hey, what's the matter with your heart? Can't you get used to being happy? Be loving and beautiful. Be your best friend. Be your best friend.
And also, having a family or a community that accepts you for who you are exactly when you open your eyes and begin to breathe in this 3D world. If you feel like there's some discrimination or there's some adversity that you know, that's the environment you're living in.
Mm,
Of course, you're going to feel like you're not, you know, you have an acceptance issue. And then you'll always try to please,
mm.
you know, to build yourself up beyond expectation to fit in and be accepted and feel like you belong.
Absolutely. I think it's something that we're all a product of those experiences. But as you say, it's being aware of that sometimes, because we slip into those habits or what we've learned sometimes easily, unless we are mindful. And you can find yourself, you know, I still find myself sometimes where I'm somewhere and I feel that need to please. And I know sometimes that can come from empathy for someone else. And I'm not talking about that where, I don't know, you're in a room with someone and someone's having a bit of a hard time, and so you kind of adjust to them and you empathize. That's different. But when you catch yourself realizing I'm saying something that I don't really necessarily believe, but I'm doing it because I feel that's what I want, what people want me to say.
Yeah.
You know, I think learning to stop. And you've spoken about this before, that idea of what do I truly believe. And I think like attracts like, and when you start to understand that, I think the people that you do attract, or who you want to be in your life, are more simpatico. So I think it is, again, that mindful awareness is also about being aware of your own patterns, because then you're not necessarily ruled by them, because so much of the way that we react in situations or a reaction we have to something is so based often on things we've experienced previously. Yeah, and being aware of that.
And if you don't mind, I mean, depending where in the world you are and who, you know, who is in your life, you know, when you reach a critical time of knowing who you are, and getting in touch with your feelings, when a young person starts feeling that they're not fitting into the norm, and you know, and your feelings are not, you know, what's supposedly socially accepted. And who do you turn to?
Absolutely, yeah. And for many people, that's the experience, that they find that really difficult, that there isn't that validation, or at least that understanding, or that willingness to listen. And they may not get that from parents, where, you know, even if a parent doesn't understand something, even if it's, you know, foreign to them, I think sometimes that ability to try to listen, to not put their own distress into the equation, or to realize at the heart of it, they want the best for their child, and how can we get there? You know, that's a really hard thing for some people, and I think a lot of people experience that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we can pull up all kinds of examples, you know, but then ultimately, I think when it comes to you, when you finally found someone who became your mate and your soulmate, and decided that you have a compatible companion that supports you and that you support, and I think it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. I was going to
And
say that, yeah, Lucy has been good. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Lucy the dog, we're not talking about, although she's come up.
animals are just as valuable. Everyone that has a heart, you know. I mean, some people aren't as lucky to have an animal. I mean, maybe someone feels that they're more lucky to have a tree.
Yeah, you know, I think when I was just writing this, and initially I wrote it and I put it on my blog and whatever, and I thank you again for saying, why don't you share this, because I've had a couple of friends say, hey, you should put this out there. Is not to, I guess, also, you know, I was talking about work and the idea of not feeling fulfilled, and I'm also aware that that's also something that sometimes is a bit of a luxury to, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of people that go, hey, you know, I don't have work, or I'm in a really difficult job, and so I want to make it as clear as possible. I'm not doing the whole woe is me. I'm aware that I've been fortunate in terms of employment and so on, but I guess and what I noticed in the you know, in my own sort of psychology work, is even during the pandemic, a lot of people were leaving jobs And what the research found is they weren't leaving jobs because a better job came along necessarily. They were leaving jobs sometimes to go sideways. So it wasn't about pay or prestige or anything like that, but it was this idea of moving somewhere that was more in line with their values. And so I'm aware I don't want to come across as ungrateful for having, the ability to have had employment and so on, but to realize the importance again of just what you value and how you want to connect with people. I think is really important because we do spend so much time at work and not necessarily that it has to be all fulfilling because, it is a job, you are performing a role. But again, where we can to try to see what do we value out of our lives? Is it about, as you said, about the tree, is it about connection with nature? Do you value that? And that will determine the way you live your life. Do you value connection with people? And that determines another way that you live your life. Is it about being creative? Is it about being really innovative? Or perhaps it's just about the relationships you have at work. So maybe the work isn't innovative or you don't find it particularly creative, but it is somewhere where you really enjoy going to. Like you said, I think those reasons for getting up in the morning. And to return to your point, that idea that we can be very lucky with the people that come into our lives that we connect with, who help us understand ourselves, who accept us for who we are and allow us to grow because they are accepting. You've spoken about this with Jared before, this idea in relation to Jared, this idea of, what he, both when you were experiencing difficulty, which you've spoken about in chapters, but just also in the everyday, that stopping to listen and to make that time.
You bring your love everywhere you go, and it's up to others to recognize it and for you to be patient.
Any day now.
you know, I think, everyone has the potential to love and to be loved. And this world, has been so filled with conflict for so long that's why we focus on our favorite four-letter word. We love love. And life is living love every moment, whether it's a waking moment or a sleeping moment. And I guess what the future holds is really finding your grace to remember that you are filled with love to give. Not everyone is available to receive. And that is where intuition comes in, to know where to give your love. And then if you're feeling that kind of rejection, then it's time to go in and fill yourself with love and a little compassion for those that are resistant in knowing how to show love. And that means that they're wounded. They have a wounded heart. I know what that feels like. You know what that feels like. So, you and I have come together for so long. And for now, it's you're talking about 3 decades. Well, it hasn't been 3 decades yet, but it is more than 2 decades.
It is more than 2 decades. Yeah.
And we've grown together. And it's been through loving each other, forgiving each other, giving each other the space and time to get to know one another. And I think we're at a point where, we've found a way to share our love with, our community where you live and in the ethers on all of these airwaves, and it's just a miracle that love is really in blossom. It is blossoming now, and or your heart would not be able to speak as honestly as you did. And just keep, I encourage you, I encourage myself, I encourage all of us to be real. And I want to read this one little thing. I have this card that says, success To live each moment fully is to succeed.
Absolutely, so true. Yeah, and we've spoken to so many people over the last couple of years on here, and people who are wanting to live in the moment, to be mindfully aware. We've spoken so much about that idea of the being compassionate to yourself, and being compassionate to other people in spite of difficult situations sometimes, and extending that compassion we have for ourselves outward to other people in that form of empathy. And that's all we can keep doing. And watching Police Academy movies, you really must.
I
Um,
have a really good suggestion.
mm.
There is a new movie called Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
Yes, the old story about Mrs. Harris who wants what does she want? She wants a
Dior dress.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And she is a housemaid in England.
Mm.
And she works for a rich lady who is going to a wedding and who just purchased a Dior dress for herself.
Mm.
And the housekeeper dreams of having a Dior. But what it leads to is fulfilling her own sense of integrity,
Mm.
her own, as you say, her own sense of value. And one thing leads to another. It's a domino effect where she is in service to her work, and then the doors start opening up. It's
Mm.
like the heavens open up to her. And the story is just phenomenal. It really is a metaphor for life these days, where you can start at the bottom and rise to the stars.
Whether that's externally or internally, and no, that sounds wonderful. I've seen the previous version of it with Angela Lansbury from the 1990s, so
Oh,
I'm looking forward to seeing this one.
Hello, my name is Katie Sharkey, and I'm an assistant professor in psychiatry and human behavior and medicine at Brown University. And today I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing one of our founders, Dr. Rosalind Cartwright, who is Professor Emerita in the Graduate Program of Neurological Sciences at Rush University Medical Center. And I'm just so thrilled to get to talk to you about some of the good old days and the new stuff. So we should get started. And I think a good place to start is how you first got interested in sleep. So in your book, you talk about sleep having been an important part of your family life.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yes.
I wanted you to tell me more about that.
Well, my mother was a big dreamer, and she loved to tell her dreams at the dinner table and intrigue us all with decoding the images. And she used her dream images very much in her poetry. She was a published poet. And my father would sit there and shake his head in wonder and say, "Stella, you have such an interesting nightlife." And that was where I got the title of the first dream book.
Yeah.
It was called Nightlife. But he did not dream. She did, at least their recollection. She had a rich dream life. He said he had not. That intrigued me as a kid.
Huh.
That people differed in. I had many psychological questions that I carried over from my childhood. That was one about the dreaming. And the other one was that my mother was convinced that sleep was a healer. Anything that was wrong with you, if you
Left on it, it'd be okay.
you would wake up feeling better in the morning. Sleep was a big healer. And I said, well, that's kind of magical. I wonder if it works, and if it works, why does it work?
What I talk a little bit about in that reading was this idea of the importance of mentors sometimes, and a mentor doesn't have to be a professional relationship. And in the case of the mentor I had, that was, we came together through a joint interest in the empathy area that Roz Cartwright, who I spoke about, had done
Oh, yes.
a lot of the original empathy research in the 1940s and 50s, and I contacted her in the early 2000s, and by then she was doing sleep research. But it started off as that, and we became friends and we connected, and I think those people in your life who have your best interests at heart, but also can provide a perspective, a wisdom, whatever it is, that's really important. So I wanted to acknowledge that one.
I love that.
Yeah, and as you know, Roz died
Yes.
almost 2 years ago at age 98. So she had a wonderfully long,
beautiful
life. But yeah, those mentors are important. You've spoken about that as well before with people who,
absolutely.
show you the way through ways that they've been in life, in all their lives, and all their complexities, and what they've learned from them, and that's really what it's all about.
I have to say, though, yes, it's really beautiful to have a mentor who has lived a long life, but there's so many ways to see that wisdom come through. It could be a little baby. It could be a young toddler. It's the connection with the eyes, and then a smile and something that touches your heart and stays with you, just to keep opening to more and more around you, to have that perspective of, that, what do you call that extra peripheral vision? It's kind of like out of the corner of your eye, you might see an angel.
Yeah. Here's hoping that we can just be more aware of what's around us, and perhaps what isn't around us, but isn't quite so obvious, whatever form that takes for people, whatever that is. So yeah, wow, we've delved in deeply to a range of different things, and I thank you for allowing me to do it.
Absolutely, honey, and stay optimistic, all of us. If something creates a little doubt, shake it off. Shake it off. I'm not dealing with fantasy. I'm dealing with your beautiful imaginations to create a world that we all want to live in. And it's up to each one of us to take the reins and stay on our path and see that we can all come together. And one by one, we'll be doing this. We'll be marching along. We'll be crusading to the life that is really, honestly, this is absolutely a reality, to overcome the past and face our shadows, let go of the darkness within yourself, and clear yourself, make space within you. And that's what you've done by writing this story and collecting your thoughts and all of your feelings. You're clearing. That's a spring cleaning, if I ever heard one, Adam.
It's a bit hard to think of spring right now here, where we're coming into winter and it's freezing.
Okay.
But I get the metaphor, absolutely.
Well, excuse me for my lack of awareness. I realize you're going into fall. We're in spring over here, so I see it as a really healthy spring cleaning, and many, many blessings. If I could give you a little pinch to grow an inch, I would, in a huggy and a big kiss on both cheeks, and many, many blessings, my love.
Thank you again, and we'll speak soon. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, love's a secret weapon.
Yes, love.